My first impressions of Panda CSS. This is an article written by Baptiste that I'm actually pretty excited to check out. I've been meaning to take a deeper look at Panda. I've been hearing really good things. Panda's from the Chakra team, and I'm personally not the biggest fan of Chakra. Didn't love Chakra because it was really component library-ish. Panda seems to be focused on being a more minimal building block, so I'm excited to see how it works and what people do with it. So let's take a look at this comparison of Tailwind and Panda. Comparison of styling solutions for the web, covering type safety, merging styles, and component variants. Interesting, because these are all things Tailwind doesn't really do. Good opening. Hey there. It's the first issue of my newsletter for 2024. Once again, shout out to the author. We'll be sure to embed his Twitter and stuff somewhere. I've been using Panda CSS for a few weeks now to build the website and the demos of XState by example. And I've got a lot of feelings I want to share with my fellow web devs. Tailwind CSS brought a lot to the table. For a bit of history, Tailwind was my go-to styling solution for nearly 5 years, and no styling solution has seduced me until recently. Tailwind is excellent for a few reasons. First, styles are edited within the markup instead of being separated. Second, final styles are predictable and it's easy to prototype. Third, it comes with an excellent quality default theme and lets developers focus on what matters instead of choosing between a font size of 14 or 15. It's not really a theme. I have a whole video about that. It's primitives you build with, not like when I think of a theme, I think of a way a button looks, not a set of border sizes. To each their own, not really themed, but I get it. Point 3, managing a website built with Tailwind is more manageable because many problems are discarded, such as finding a good name for the CSS class or dealing with specificity and cascading problems. Absolutely agree. Maintaining styles was a thing I used to spend a lot of time on that I spend almost none with Tailwind. It's way quicker to fix things, find things, change things, build things. Just Tailwind makes CSS get out of your way. And then point 5, Tailwind generates atomic classes, keeping the bundle size tiny. It generates the same class once, no matter how often it's used. Again, I don't think we will appreciate this point enough. It's very, very hard to make a styling solution that is more performant and efficient than Tailwind because you're reusing these class names all across your code base and you're generating that one CSS file for your entire website. You load one pretty small CSS file and then all of your CSS is handled. And since there's repetitive parts in your markup, you can gzip that really well too. The performance of Tailwind and its impact on both the size of your markup in HTML as well as the size of your CSS is actually really, really good. Anyways, of course, Naman's here. For those who don't know, Naman is the creator of StyleX. Panda is a maximalist StyleX. It has some good ideas. And yes, is me, maintainer of StyleX. Figured as much, Naman. Good to see you. Interesting that you have positive things to say. I'm extra curious now. He also called out that once you use Tailwind merge, a lot of the performance wins from Tailwind start to crumble. Yeah, fair. You have a point. Anyways, I bought Tailwind UI, the paid templates built by the Tailwind CSS team, and I use it for my clients and my side projects. Without exaggerating, it's one of the best purchases I've made. The return on estimate is high for the price it costs. I agree. I am going to confess something. Here's the upload thing homepage. There you go. Look familiar? Oh, I've made my point. Tailwind UI was a very, very good purchase for us. It has got us really far. Most of our design's been complemented more than anything and did some customization. I will say the code for this was awful and the placing of these blobs expected the homepage to always be perfectly vertical. So I did actually change a lot of the code, but the design, thank you, Tailwind. I appreciate y'all. You make a good deal. Anyways, I learned much about CSS and designing user interfaces thanks to Tailwind. Also, hard agree. I had plateaued in my CSS knowledge pretty hard and just tried to get out of CSS whenever I could and focus on the things I was more excited about. Tailwind made CSS so much easier is the wrong word. Fun to engage with by trimming out all the annoying parts and focusing on the styling part. It made CSS so much more fun for me. And that feeling of what I call like the Zen, where you're just typing the specific class names that you know are needed for the thing. You hit save, they sort themselves correctly, and it works. So good. The reason is that the default preset gives excellent tools to non-designer people. Yep, again, we don't have a designer at Ping right now and we're getting away with it. The sole job of finding colors that look good together is difficult. Also, one of my favorite things, even when I'm not using Tailwind, I'll pull up the color doc because their color palette is just so good. The ease of prototyping and the fantastic documentation quality can explain that as well. So, here's where we get into type safety. Type safe CSS and JS with build time generated styles. That sounds familiar. That sounds quite a bit like a few things we've talked about on the stream. Started hearing about Panda on Twitter less than a year ago. Let's see. Actually follow me. Good shit. You've earned a follow back. Alexander is one of the core contributors to Panda, and he was advocating for it on Twitter. I only dug deeper recently when I asked myself, what would I use to style my new project? XState by example. You know, if it already has an X, why not StyleX? Panda CSS is a CSS in JS solution that extracts the styles at build time instead of runtime, resulting in better performance. It looks like this. Oh. I'm not going to like this. I'm not going to like this at all. One of my least favorite things anyone ever did to Tailwind was this awful thing called Attributify mode. It was usually a config for Tailwind alternatives that were usually CSS and JS things like Windy, or I believe there's a mode for this for Uno also has an Attributify mode, if I recall. I hate this. It entirely destroys the thing I was just describing with Tailwind about the Zen mode, because now I have to press enter. Now I have to remember which key is which. Now when I'm like reading through, I have to remember which part I'm on. Like, is this BG or is this border? You don't have any guarantee of order because it could be top, bottom, left, right, anything. I hate this. I agree that having a better context when you're reading through your classes is nice and knowing where things are is important. But that's why the Tailwind Prettier plugin that auto sorts the classes is so good, because they're always the same order, so you don't have to worry about it. I think the problem this is trying to solve is solved way better with the automatic ordering, and this is just causing more problems, not solving them. Like just the number 2 in a string. Okay, anyways, back to this, because I don't want to let my previous hatred of these solutions cloud my ability to judge Panda fairly. So Panda extracts things at build time instead of runtime, similar to vanilla, similar to StyleX, and it generates markup that is literally just Tailwind. This is really funny. It writes the Tailwind for you by making you press the enter key more. Okay, I'll stop. I promise. I'm sorry. The fact that you have to press 15 symbols for everything you want to do, I can't stop. I have to keep going. I'm sorry. We all agree that pressing underscore, pressing colon, pressing quote, pressing comma, pressing enter, pressing all these things is worse than pressing any of the keys near the middle of your keyboard or spacebar, right? Like we all agree with that, because the amount I have to maneuver around the keyboard to apply a background color, a border, and a font size is absurd. That it's just the amount of typing I have to do is so much worse that it drives me insane. Okay, I saw an actually really good question. If it compiles, why not make it a single unique class name? Because doing that is incredibly inefficient. This is why most of the compiled solutions suck, because most of the compiled solutions make a very specific assumption that everything needs to be unique. Because these are compiled as individual things for each field you've filled out, now if you have, let's say, 14 places that use font size 2XL, you don't have to include one additional line in 14 unique classes. Instead, you have all 14 of those things have the font size 2XL class. It lets your CSS be way smaller because you have a much, much smaller number of classes, and you will eventually hit performance issues just by having a certain number of classes that your browser has to deal with. And on top of that, your markup will be better too. I know that sounds unintuitive because it's like, wait, aren't you just putting a bunch of small class names in the markup? Well, yeah, theoretically, the markup could be a little better. More often than not, those class names get long, tedious, and are very unique. Whereas when you have a set of classes that are reused across your code base that are always in the same order, those can be gzipped to be really small. So as much as that unique class might sound better, it actually makes compression worse in a lot of cases. Yeah, this is going to drive me insane. Let's keep going. I want to approach this as chill as I can. I want to try and appreciate what they're doing here. I just don't like the amount of work I see when I look at this. Anyways, you can group styles by conditions, large for large breakpoint, or by property. Wait, or? You're winning me over. Looking back at this, I think we got a little blinded by my hatred of Attributify, because large here makes this very different. I will say it is Panda's fault for me falling for that, because one of these is a subgroup of targets. So in this case, we want the background color to be base 50 gray, on hover to get darker. This is a subsection of different style things I would want to apply. If you are a Tailwind user, this is the thing you'd put for the first 2 characters at the start of your Tailwind call. This is a viewport selector. These are 2 very different things, and having them next to each other like this makes it very easy to skim over and not realize that this is an entirely different behavior than what this is. That's a bit scary to me. I was actually thinking the code review here might be better, but what I'm seeing here feels worse. I'm stealing your quote, Angela, without crediting you because I can't get the words right. These are properties. These are media queries. They shouldn't be the same index level. You can convince me in Tailwind that media query selectors aren't great, especially the idea of doing things in groups like that. The auto sort helps a ton here, because if you have multiple things prefixed with large, they all get bumped to be in a group together. But you could also convince me something like Tailwind helper equals this, where I have LG colon BG gray 200 flex column. and different behaviors where you have this helper. This can even be part of Tailwind merge where you have the media queries out as the keys and then the value is the properties. But having the keys intermixing properties and media queries makes it so I can't really rely on that. The other scary part here is that the order can be changed and you can do really nasty stuff that makes the code review here miserable. Like you can put this there. That's cursed. This went from perceivably easier to review to significantly harder to review with that one small thing. And to go back to the type safety point, which we haven't even gotten to really, the reason I like type safety is because it makes small errors less likely and often makes code reviews and consuming other people's code easier and more reliable. I feel like I'm throwing that away with this. Even though it is type safe in the sense that this will all autocomplete, it's also less reliable in the sense that the order when I read this is less consistent. So yeah, I'm losing as much as I'm gaining as I read. Again, I can't agree that this helps with readability. I just totally misunderstood what this was because of said readability. Theoretically, a prettier plugin could force that these are at the top or the bottom, which is where I'd probably want them at the top so they're clearly called out there. But if you're using these, I would want it to have to be under some other key. Like, here's what I would do. Have defaults, have this always apply, or even base might make more sense for this. But this being at the same level, I hate this. I hate this so much. This stresses me out just looking at it. Anyways, let's get to the cool parts because the code gen is actually dope. Panda CSS relies on code gen to generate only the styles used in the project. This is another one of those things that like Panda, StyleX, and Tailwind do that other solutions don't. I don't even want to think about how many unused classes there are shipping in the CSS for the Twitch website. I personally have left at least a dozen of those that will be there probably forever or until they rewrite the entire site. Yeah, this solves that. At any solution that solves that, I'm default pretty good with. So we'll see how they're doing this exactly. Another thing pointed out here is that this dev loves that the styles are type safe. You define styles by calling the CSS function, whose types only accept the styles existing in your project. The code gen also generates the type definition of the function, so it reflects Panda's configuration in the project. That's also really cool. This is something that kind of been hacked into Tailwind with the prettier extension, but not much so. Honestly, this kind of feels like Prisma, where it uses the schema you've defined to generate type definitions when you use it. Having a config that defines all the things you allow or enforce in your Panda setup for your project generate a type safe output. It's actually really nice. Hadn't thought about that. That's cool. The code gen generates its output in a styled system directory at the project's root. Yeah, it's cool. And that's actually code that becomes part of the project rather than getting stuffed as an override in your node modules. Again, similar to Prisma. Really interesting. To me, type safety is Panda's most significant advantage over Tailwind. With Tailwind, developers must use a VS Code extension to check the validity of the classes they wrote in a string. Tailwind's DX is deteriorated because styles are written in a string without any native type checking possibility. Who's going to tell this dev about Vue? I've never seen Vue catch so many strays, and I've seen Vue catch a lot of strays. That's hilarious. That said, honestly, I would have largely agreed with this before the prettier plugin. I love type checking. I love type safety. That's how my whole channel and brand and T3 and all of this started, was because I care so much about type safety. And I care about it for a lot of the same reasons here. The developer experience, the autocomplete, the reliability of doing this inside of VS Code. Those are all things I really cared about. Thankfully, the Tailwind VS Code extension helps a ton. I can just hover over this and you see the exact class, exact CSS being applied here. So if I add some things here, like large P8, mid P4, now when I save, it auto sorts itself to be in the right places. There is an annoyance here of when I save, it moves the thing I was just typing somewhere else sometimes, but that's the biggest annoyance I have using Tailwind. The important piece here is about the type safety. What if I totally typo something like BG red 800 instead of BG dash red and I save it? Something really interesting happens. It gets bumped all the way to the front. And depending on how you have your config set up, that might actually give you an error, which is really nice. It's not type safety in the sense that TypeScript isn't doing it, but it's wrong class safety in the sense that Prettier still can check and guarantee these things for you. There are also ESLint rules that do the same thing. It's somewhat trivial to keep yourself from entering things that aren't real Tailwind classes. So if we break down the benefit of type safety to less errors in the output code because they're being type checked with some form of linter or enforcer, and autocomplete / error semantics behaving better overall, this solves both. This is fine. And I'm saying this as the TypeScript nerd. I don't love relying on linting when I could rely on TypeScript, but we're checking if a string has valid keys. It's not a big deal. It's not the worst thing. I've also just been informed by Gabriel of a pretty cool VS Code plugin. Well, it's not really VS Code, it's ESLint, and it streamlines your Tailwind code apparently. Interesting. So if it notices you have multiple class names that could be replaced with a single one that applies the same stuff, that's really nice. So if you're writing too verbose of things that could be simplified, it will do it for you. Personally, I don't know if I would use this because I might have a reason. I had 3 things in there because I want to change one of them sometimes and not other times. But it's a cool idea. I actually like this overall. You can see why many would want to use this, and it would, again, make the consistency of the readability of your Tailwind code base pretty good. Not my thing. I'll leave a link in the description regardless because it is interesting. Okay, I think this is where we're going to start agreeing a lot because merging styles in Tailwind isn't great. This example here is something that you probably expect me to make fun of, but no, I've done this so many times with Tailwind, and it has a lot of catches. Like if you define the class names you're passing somewhere that isn't another TSX file or isn't being checked by your Tailwind config, you're just not going to have these classes show up. Or if you're generating them dynamically, like a thing you just cannot do in Tailwind is a function that like const get background that takes in number, which can be 400 or 500 or 600. And this returns bg red plus num. You'd think this code would work and I could just use this. The problem here is that the way Tailwind works is it reads all your code, it looks for all the strings, it finds all of the strings that exist within its understanding of potential Tailwind stuff. And once it has done that, it generates a CSS file with all of the exact strings you have used. That's why something like this works, because again, the Tailwind compiler is reading all your code files and it sees this value. What wouldn't work, again, would be something like this, where you pass num like this. Intuitively, this should work, but with the way the Tailwind compiler works, it doesn't function. And I've seen this bite lots of developers. Even my CTO just got bit by this like a few days ago when we were demoing some stuff. This is scary. And the only way you'll ever get this to work is if you're running some JavaScript to detect these classes. I think that's cool. I think it's a fair compromise. And I'm already seeing people in chat saying, and I love that it doesn't work. Static definition of styles is extremely critical to my workflow. And he said he loves that this doesn't work. I agree. Static definition of styles is almost necessary for things to scale. Inline styles are similar, but they get none of the benefits and the markup's way worse and not ordered. And no. Yeah, static styles scale significantly better. Absolutely. There are things for this, but the easiest thing to do is honestly to just have a random file that includes one string with all the classes you need, and then it gets hit by the compiler and you don't have to worry about it. Yeah, the just-in-time compiler is a good thing, and we should embrace it. Anyways, back to this. So this was an example with merging styles. This is actually a really fun example because this button has a py1, so that's padding vertical 1. But we've now appended class names here, and we're passing py4. So we want to override the default padding with this new one. The problem is that it's hard to determine if the vertical padding will be overridden. This might seem trivial, like obviously py4 is at the end. That's going to work, right? So we have these 2 elements. This div has classes A and B, and this div has classes B and A. Let's do something fun. We'll define A with background color red. That all makes sense so far. We're going to add something. We're going to add B, and this is going to have a different background color. I want y'all to predict what happens when I add this background color. I'm going to make it blue. Do you think, I'll poll chat because I'm curious. The options would be AB turns blue, BA stays red. AB stays red, BA turns blue. Actually, I'm going to change this to be labeled 1 and 2, so it's a little easier. The first option would be 1 changes blue, 2 stays red. Option 2 is 1 stays red, 2 goes blue. Option 3 is they both change. I will run the poll quick. So the first one has A, then B. Second one has B, then A. Here I have A, then I'm about to define B. I should have had both stay red. Yeah, cover all options. Most people got it, but a lot of people fell for a pretty common thing, which is that you assume the order the classes appear here is the order they're applied. Sadly, that is not the case because CSS kind of sucks. The issue is that the order classes are applied to elements has nothing to do with the order you wrote them in the element. It is purely based on the order they are in the CSS file. This gets even more fun if your CSS loads out of order, and then you could have different behaviors depending on which order the CSS loads in, because it's not determined by what order you put the classes on, it's determined by what order the CSS is given to the browser. It is terrible. So why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because let's say instead of we flip these, so py4 is here and py1 is here. If both of those classes are applied to this element, the one you passed here isn't necessarily going to override the one that was defaulted here, unless the one passed here occurs later in the CSS file. We have effectively created a race condition, which is not good. And this will have really rough edge cases to debug. I know that. I have had them. I had them a lot very early when I used Tailwind. As the author specifies, Tailwind will both generate the py1 and 4 classes and put them in a CSS file with the same specificity, which makes the class defined last take precedence over the other one. But which one? I can't tell you. There are many solutions to circumvent this, like using the important keyword on the overriding class or setting the React component to receive a property like vertical padding, and letting the component choose which class to apply. This is what I lean into, honestly, but I get why that's annoying, especially for smaller teams. But what you'll end up doing, including us, is we use Tailwind merge. Finds the classes defining the same property and it keeps the last one. So if you use Tailwind merge with the originals and then this new class, it will replace the py1 with the py4. But here is where Panda comes in. Because out of the box, it just does that. You can pass multiple objects to the CSS helper, and it will flatten that for you. That's actually really nice. And I like that that's built in rather than being a third-party thing, because it means you can optimize this with compilers much better than with Tailwind merge. And you don't get the weird minification quirks where this no longer can be gzipped anywhere near as clean. One more quick thing on the sort order of classes. This is one of the biggest reasons to use the prettier plugin when you're using Tailwind, because if you're not, you might accidentally put the classes in the wrong order, and then the behavior is really unintuitive. If you use the Tailwind Prettier plugin, the order that they're sorted in your code will be the same as the order it's sorted in your CSS, so the likelihood you hit one of those cases is significantly lower. Anyways, component variants. I've often written code like this to create a badge with variants. How many places do we have like this exact same code in our code base, Mark? I'm getting flashbacks. We have a lot of things. We would have used type instead of interface, but otherwise we've written this too many times, way too many times. Curious how they handle this variant. The code becomes even more complex with more variants, like the badge size. The issue with merging styles is also relevant here. Yeah, if you also want to add badge size here, now you're combining a bunch of different sets of strings to try and architect that into a good to apply class. This is probably where I'm going to get swung much more pro Panda. The issue with merging styles is also relevant here, and this is why things like class variants authority and Tailwind variants both exist. CVA is really dope. It's created by Joe Bell, used to work at Vercel, really talented dev, focusing on making Tailwind scale way better for design systems. It's inspired by things like Stitches and Vanilla Extract, but it lets you use Tailwind still instead. It's really nice. As it's becoming a theme, Panda supports is out of the box. This is, okay, I was so scared this was still the CSS thing. And it's be like, oh no, that's awful. But no, it's a separate import CVA, which is nice. Also, I'm seeing again that they're importing these from the local styled systems folder rather than from the package because it generates that. It's pretty nice to see. This is nice that there's this level of like deep variant behaviors built in where you can still use these chunks. My question would be how much composability exists here? Like how easy is it for me to define the color in BG as a value that is type safe and then use that in multiple CVA'd variant sets in different places? I would assume it's a pretty good story, but I haven't seen it. It would really come down to, can I put a CSS helper here instead of just the object, which as long as you can, I'm sure this is great. And you just grab this by using their styled helper. Wait, does this just create a component with styled? No. Is this styled components? No, you don't have to do that. Just make me apply this as CSS. No, I hate this. So close, so close. They had me until you have a weird syntax for defining JSX. Ugh, we were so close, guys. The variants are strongly typed automatically. You must pass the status variant when using the app badge styles or the app badge component and provide one of the defined options. As long as you can call this with the specific variant key that you want to use, that'd be nice, but I don't love that this will result in a code base with a lot of different weirdly nested ways to define UI. Like imagine that 3 components in this code base use the app badge helper span wrapper, and then 3 of them couldn't use span. So instead of overriding this, they use this independently in 3 different places. Now you'll misleadingly make a change here, thinking that it'll only affect this, and then 3 other people's things break. I see a lot of potential fragility in enabling and allowing both. I would throw away this entirely if I adopted Panda. This part's dope though. Also that it's very directly like class variance authority, like they're borrowing that pattern directly. It's nice, it's a good pattern. It's pretty good. I like how the library has been carefully thought out as, don't know if I agree with the wording there, but I agree that the flexibility is really nice. There is much more to discover. Panda is a recent library and with many exciting and well-made features. Amongst all its features, I especially like the following. Slot recipes. Some UI elements need to be separated into several parts. For dialog component, there might be a trigger, content, title, description, and close trigger parts. You would want to define these styles as part of the same group of component variants. Slot recipes offer this, and Park UI uses them to define component styles. I, once again, have feelings. This feels like it would get really nasty in the nesting really quickly. And again, I don't think everything needs to be done in an object when it could be done in markup. Like, This is what's kind of confusing to me. Like, how often would you reuse this recipe? I feel like if I wrote this, it would be for one component and all these things would be applied in that one component. At which point I would be just as happy with 3 of these, one for root, one for control, one for label, that are way less deeply nested and way more readable. I would personally much rather scroll up and down to these different element types to see how they're defined in the different conditions than to blend portions of them so deeply together like this. This is actually, I think, the root of where my uncertainty is coming from here. Is one of my favorite parts of Tailwind is how consistent it is when you read it. It's always going to be the same. It almost feels like prettier in that way, where once you've made this thing always look the same, it is way easier to review, make changes to, and have confidence in. I'd even say it's like Go in that way, where there aren't many ways to do things and they're pretty straightforward and easy to lint. This gives you too much flexibility. And I can't believe I'm saying that because my whole thing is modular tools that let you do what you want. This one lets you do too much. And I have weird feelings. What are the other examples here? Config recipes. By default, Panda generates the styles for all of the class variants authority variants, even those never used at runtime. Using config recipes, Panda can generate the CSS only for the actually used variants. Config recipes are extracted and generated just in time. Regardless of the number of recipes, only the recipe variants you use will exist. The recipe needs to take the class name, an array of all the components that use it, and a description. The description is optional, but oh no, you have to put it as a string. This is my issue here. There are just so many layers. It's not necessarily bad. I just personally would want like 1/4 of this. If it was easier to take a subset of all the things they offer here and enforce that, I'd be cool. But as soon as we're passing JSX string literal hints to generate the minimal subset of CSS being used, we've lost the plot. I feel like we're way too out in the woods here. I feel very similar to how I feel when I was reading through Uno, where there's just so many things. And this is why I loved Tailwind. I feel like we escaped all of this. Am I about to become like the old HTMX person, the get off my lawn guy? Because we made it simpler. I don't want to make it more complex. And this gives too many options. I have to shout out Naman, who just pointed out that we feel very similarly here. As I mentioned before, Naman made StyleX. And if I find some random examples in here with StyleX, you'll see it's got options, but not many. It exports like 2 things. They're pretty consistent, and you call them as classes. You just apply, sorry, not even as classes, you just dump their props. And it's not very deeply nested. It's not super annoying to config. It doesn't have a lot of weird quirks. It just kind of does its thing. You add the rollup plugin so it can compile out the styles and you're mostly done. It doesn't have the same level of configurability because it doesn't have a config that defines what you can and can't do the same way, but you can also just write it and it works. This feels much more like an in-between. And if I was personally to start working on a style system for a big company, I would be leaning in the StyleX direction for sure. Again, Naman points out he's anti-config. And for what he is doing, I dig that. And this is my feeling. In one of my older videos, I did a really, really good diagram that I should find so I could cite it more, where I compare all these different solutions and I phrase them as behavior libraries, CSS++, like things that are meant to focus on improving CSS overall, and style systems. A style system would be something like Bootstrap or Tailwind, where it defines a bunch of specific styles that you would want to apply, like a button style. Behavior libraries are things that handle like when the menu opens and closes, accessibility tags, stuff like that. And CSS++ is things that make the actual writing of CSS a bit less painful. And the weird thing about Panda is it feels like it's kind of dipping its toes in all of these when its focus is being CSS++. I also would say something like StyleX is really interesting because it is CSS++, but it's CSS++ with the goal of making it easy for you to build your design and style system. So I would use StyleX to build my own thing here and then bring in a behavior library. Where with Panda, I would define the style system in their config and then use their syntax to define my style system in my code. And that back where I have to switch mental contexts from config to CSS to JavaScript to potential output kind of destroys the simplicity that I got from Tailwind. And yeah, it feels like more steps to the same compiled output with a lot of weird edges. And I'm not that into it. That said, this article was great. And I am genuinely hyped that this was written. Huge shout out to Baptiste. Yeah, I'll give you a sub. Thank you, Baptiste, for writing an awesome article. I hope you take the opportunity to make some content in response, because I will certainly throw my audience your way. As a Tailwind dev, that was a really good dive in to start to understand Panda and what its goals are and why someone would use it. It's definitely not for me, but I'm starting to see the value. Curious about you guys though. Were you as jarred by the attributify patterns as I was, or do those look exciting to you? Let me know in the comments. Super curious. Thank you guys as always. See you in the next one. Peace, nerds.